Hi, and welcome to another collaboration between Sigmax Field Service Solutions and Dime.Scheduler. Today's topic, of course, is Field Service Management in Business Central. My name is Hendrik Bullens. I am Managing Partner at Dime.Scheduler, and I'm joined here today by, well, the man himself, Mr. Rick Scherphoff, Sales Manager at Sigmax Field Service Solutions. How are you today?
I'm very fine, thank you. Good to be here.
Yeah, as you know, we have a lot of ground to cover, lots of good things to show. Why don't you do the honors and tell the ladies and gentlemen what we're going to do today?
Okay, what we're going to do today in about 30 minutes or so is a demo of Dime.Scheduler and a demo of Sigmax Connect, the field service app. And it's a standard plugin into Business Central, and we're going to show you that in right a moment.
Yeah, that sounds good. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Yeah, me too. Let's get to it. Now, as Rick mentioned at the beginning, the goal of today is to take you a little bit on a tour of Business Central with two of our extensions connected to it. That would be Dime.Scheduler for the planning side of things and Sigmax Connect for pretty much everything else. And what we had in mind is one extended demo of both our products with Business Central at the heart and center. So currently on screen here is the outline of our demos. We'd start off with standard Business Central. We'll create a service order there, which we're going to send over immediately to our planning tool, Dime.Scheduler, where we'll look for the best resource for the job. Once we found a resource, we'll drag it onto the planning board, drop it in, and then we'll have a look at Business Central, how that planning data arrives in there. After a quick overview of how that is processed, we'll switch over to Rick's demo, and he'll have a look with you to support the end-to-end workflows for the technicians on the road and in the field. And by the end of all of that, we'll be half an hour later and we can wrap up this presentation. And I would like to do the same thing for this introduction, which I think has been more than long enough. I think it's time to see some action. So let's get to it then. And for that, I need to switch over to my other tabs, which I've got open in my browser here. What we're seeing here is our trusty planning tool, Dime.Scheduler. And in the third tab, we have a standard instance of Business Central. I'm going to use Business Central Cloud today, but the same story applies to Business Central on-premises and even for older versions of NAV. But back to our planning tool here. Long story short, Dime.Scheduler is a visual planning layer around Business Central data, allowing you to basically plan anything and anyone. As you can already tell on screen, there's a lot happening here. There's a lot to cover. I think I will get to most of it, but typically we start the story here in a component that we call the Open Tasks List. This Open Task List shows all the work that still needs to be planned in. In our nomenclature, a task is just simply a unit of work. It's something that needs to be carried out. We could be talking about installation work, repair, maintenance. Anything that you want to plan can be considered a task. And you also define at what level you want to plan. For us, it's just a row that you want to have at this list. The name of the game is drag and drop these open tasks onto, obviously, the planning board, which is the component that we see here in the middle of the screen. And it's arguably the most important component of them all because, of course, that's where you will do your planning, your replanning, and so on. At the left-hand side of the component, we have our list of resources. And much like a task, a resource is anything or anyone that you want to plan. We could be referring them to as technicians, project managers, sales managers. Maybe you want to plan your fleet of vehicles, special equipment. It doesn't matter. A resource is just a row on our planning board. That's the idea. And for each row on the planning board, you'll have the timeline at your disposal. And all of these blocks here, that's our schedule. I'll get back to this color coding scheme because I see you in my corner of my eye. I see you're asking what are all these colors having to signify. I'll get back to these later on. We'll have this color coding system which we can use to represent certain types of work, certain statuses, and so on. But I'll get back to this topic a bit later. Same goes for all of these components. In addition, on our screen, for example, the geographical map, the resource filters, we have a capacity and planning pivot grid. I'll get to these later on, but suffice it to say that these are supported components to help the planner look for the best applicable resource for the job. But before I get to all of these, we have to still introduce probably the most important element of them all, And of course, that's Business Central. Without Business Central, there will be no data to work with in Dime.Scheduler. So for today, I'll be using standard Business Central Cloud with standard service orders, but you could use any kind of customized version of the service orders list, or even something completely bespoke. As long as you can generate an item in Business Central, we can work with that. You might as well use preventive maintenance contracts, service contracts to generate service orders. That's all the same. But to keep the pace of this demo quick, I'll just fill out the minimum amount of fields of this new service order. Starting with the customer, that will also populate a bunch of address fields, which we'll use in a second on the geographical map. I'm going to indicate the service item that we're going to repair. So that's the one we can use. And to get back to this topic of the color coding system, we have this little standard functionality in Business Central, where you could, for example, use the service order type to link it to one of these background colors on the planning board, which is what I've done in my particular environment. So each option in this list is linked to a background color on the planning board. So by looking at the colors, I know immediately what kind of work are we dealing with, what's on the schedule for any resource at any given time and day. For example, I know by heart preventive maintenance contracts are represented in this bright yellow color on the planning board, whereas what I'm going to select now, service, is using this dark blue color on the planning board. It's standard functionality, so you can use it, you can override it, do something completely custom with it. It's up to you to decide what makes most sense for your organization. In the end, when the order is ready, when you're good to go, when there's somebody waiting for your quotation to arrive on site, all you need to do then is navigate to the Actions item in the ribbon, expand the Dime.Scheduler submenu, and then you can send this order to the planning tool.
Okay, Hendrik, you said that any system can be used to provide planning data. Is that why we're seeing this button in Business Central?
Exactly that. So Dime.Scheduler wasn't actually built inside Business Central, but it's heavily integrated with BC. So you don't need to use Business Central data if that's not what you want to use. You might as well use transactional systems, other line of business systems. But we provide some standard functionality in Business Central, like we're seeing here for the service orders. We're using standard tables, standard fields to link Business Central to our planning tool. Okay. Same goes, by the way, for this button right here. We don't want to impose any business logic or any fixed ways of planning into Business Central, because that may not be what you want to do and what to achieve. But the button is there. If you want to use it, you can use it. If there's some way to automate, if there's a workflow that you can enforce, you could use that functionality and just simply sort of click behind the scenes on the Send Order button, which will then trigger an update to our planning tool. So in the end, however you do it, what we're going to do now, as we click on this button, we're going to gather all the information relevant for planning, contact information, customer contacts, addresses, email addresses, the service item. We're going to gather the entire data graph and send it into one single row in our list of unplanned tasks. So we're going to see a new item appear for this service order 189 in our list of unplanned work. Let me close BC for just a second. I'll get back to this soon enough. And zoom in on our list of unplanned work, where you can already see at the bottom here, this order 189 just shows up automatically without doing anything. Just updates are sent and pushed straight to the client's browser without manual interactions required. Now, as soon as a row appears in this list, it's completely up to the planner to decide what's going to happen next. Perhaps the planner already knows who's going to do the job. Then you just have to do drag and drop to the planning board, and the planning is done. But sometimes you may want to use more information from the job itself. We have a whole bunch of components, like the columns, sorting, grouping, filters. You can do all kinds of orchestrations to set it up just so you can see what kind of work you're dealing with and how you can make your decision based on that.
Hendrik, let's say a customer has two divisions that he wants to plan. Can you somehow visualize that one?
Absolutely. So there's nothing on screen that's actually fixed, so you can slide around your components the way you think makes sense. And it might as well be you want to have two buckets of unplanned work. So what you could do is drag a new instance of your open tasks here on screen to a place that you think is usable, and then set it up just so for example, you may want to see all your items from the eastern region of the country or from a certain area. Set your filters to something like, for example, you may want to see the projects in this list. So you can really make personalized, smaller buckets of correlated work, which will make it easier for certain area managers to plan their work that they're supposed to see. So everything is configurable, everything can be personalized for people, for departments, for user roles, and so on. So again, here we're not going to impose any business logic, any workflows, and how you should be operating. It's actually you that brings over your business to Dime.Scheduler and not the other way around.
All right, thanks.
All right, so yeah, if you already know who's going to do it, all you need to do basically is drag and drop your task somewhere on a planning board. I'm not going to do that, so I'll escape my action here, because you may want to use some more suggestions from a tool like Dime.Scheduler to find the right resource for the job. That criteria might be based on location, on qualifications, and obviously also availability.
Oh, okay, but does that also mean that Sigmax Connect can provide geographical data?
Absolutely. So any source can be used as to provide geo-coordinates, as long as you can provide the coordinates and the resource identifier, which will typically be the resource number in Business Central.
Okay.
So let's click here on this order 189. If there's location known for that order, it will reposition the map, as you can see, and it will show where that order needs to take place. So this blue marker here, when I hover over that pin, you can see this order 189 needs to be executed somewhere in the south of the London metropolitan area. And then you can make simulations of trips to see which resources are close by. In my case, they're represented by these purple markers. And you could simulate and see how long it would take for a given resource to get there and perhaps help the customer out at the end of the day. So we can see this trip would take about 45 minutes for a mere 20-kilometer drive. So perhaps that could be doable. We don't know. If we have a look at Richard's schedule here, which we can see at the bottom, there's not much going on there, as you can tell. So purely based on where that person is at that moment, you could decide to plan that order in for that resource 189. Up to the scheduler to decide if that makes sense or not. And maybe one final remark, and I'm getting back to your question here. Planning for resources can be done on their actual locations, but you could also plan, and I've set it up in my environment here, on some static addresses, typically the employee's home address that you manage in Business Central. But you could technically use any track and trace device imaginable, mobile apps like Sigmax Connect. There's no limits to the integration capabilities of that functionality. Planning based on geographical dimension could be one thing, could be enough for some companies, but it might not be enough for others. They may want to use more tips to find the right resource for the job. And I already showed you that you could slide around all the components, you could reorganize them, perhaps in such a way that you can see the map at the same time as another component here, which is the resource filters component. And that essentially is a query filter builder, where you can look for resources with certain attributes. With standard BC, we have regions and skills, but you could think about any dimension you can think of. Could be languages, certifications, departments, you name it. It can be provided as a category here, and you can look for resources with some of these attributes like a skill and perhaps a zone. So let maybe construct a filter for this order. Perhaps I know they need to operate in the middle of the country. I need to have this skill. Construct your query, hit this filter button, and then you'll see the resources are filtered out that do not meet these criteria. If you don't like what you're seeing, you could modify your query, maybe remove the region skill, the region attribute, reapply your filter, and you'll see more resources with the right skill, but not necessarily operating in the right area. So again, here, it's up to the planner to make the judgment call what makes most sense. Of course, this being Business Central, it's master data, so you might as well use the same data model to assign it to your tasks as requirements. So if you know beforehand what the required attributes are for a resource to carry out that work successfully, you can send them along with your task from BC, in which case you'll see this filter button will be enabled. And of course, the idea is that you can click on that. This fills up the requirements of your resources and then immediately executes the query against our list of resources. So with one click of a button, we see the 3 people here that the planner may want to consider. Again, it's not mandatory, so if nothing makes sense, you can overrule all the tips provided by the data that you can bring over. So if you want to ignore all of that, you can do that, not a problem at all. So at the end of the day, what you want to do is take your task, drag it, and drop it somewhere on the planning board. So let's put this one on the books for this Thursday. And as soon as I release this mouse right here, a whole bunch of digital witchcraft is going on behind the scenes to notify other applications of this new planning data. For starters, this order 189 no longer shows up in our list of unplanned work, as you can see. So this open task list really means open tasks. So it just shows the work that's not planned at all or not completely planned. If you're working on multi-day trips, that would be the way you want to have it appear more than once.
Yeah, how does this work if this task has a 2-day job, for example?
You can specify budgets on your task, so that will determine how long a task will show up in the open task list. So it will determine how many hours you have to plan into the planning board to make it disappear or not. Of course, in my setup here, the budget is 0, so once you drag and drop one task, it disappears from the list. But if you can work with budgets, you can define how long a task should be planned in, and the open tasks component will take that into account. Let me maybe show you, if I delete this one from the planning board, this order 189 comes up back again. So we're reopening the task. Perhaps maybe there's additional budget to be done. There's more work than anticipated. So you can always make it appear back again into the list of unplanned work. See? But let's put this one back to the planning board, because I want to show you the whole essence of what we're trying to achieve with Dime.Scheduler is that everything starts in Business Central and everything ends in Business Central as well. Every block on screen has some kind of link to some entity in Business Central. So if you want to have more information, you can open up the context menu by right-clicking on your appointment. And then under the links here, we can navigate to associated links like customer cards, to-do lists, checklists. But more interestingly, for the purposes of this demo, I want to go back to my service order. This just opens up a new tab in the browser and takes us back to this order 189, which we've created a few minutes ago. And what we're going to do here by default, and I repeat, by default, is write back these blocks on the planning board as resource allocation lines. So we had one block already associated to this order 189. We'll again see under the resource allocation lines that there's one line corresponding here in BC. So this line is the exact same thing as the block on the planning board. They're the same data. So now we have the data in Business Central. We can now have this bidirectional flow from Business Central, or by extension, Sigmax Connect and other ISV solutions that are linked to the BC ecosystem. Let's say for a second that this resource was notified of this new planning, and he called the dispatcher that the planning maybe won't be feasible. So he asked to reschedule. So you could simply take your block, drag it somewhere else. Maybe we'll put it on Friday afternoon. To avoid this resource to go back on Monday to complete the job, so they can leave early on Friday, you could assign a second resource by holding the Shift key on your keyboard and then drag that block and assign it to another resource. So when I do this, you can expect there's now going to be 2 blocks in Business Central. So if I go back, hit F5, you'll see the allocation date will now be a date later. And now we also have our second resource ends up in Business Central. So this table is crucial because it's the essence of Business Central's standard functionality, which other solutions can tap into and provide their own functionality, like the one we're going to see in a couple of minutes. But before we go there, I would like to show you one more thing. And actually, it's got a bit of an overlap with what Rick is going to show, because I want to show you the bidirectional flow from Business Central back to the planning board. And for that, I should go back and have a look at these colors. So that color coding system can be quite useful to have updates sent back to the planner, so the planner knows right away what's going on with his workforce and what they're doing at the moment. So as I told at the beginning, this blue color, that's linked to that order type of the general service order. So this color is linked to that type that we set in Business Central. But we also have a second component, or a second color coding element, which we can see at the bottom of that appointment. So this bluish, grayish underscore is linked by default to the repair status code. So if you have a little look here, this color is linked to a status code called initial. And this value is linked to the repair status code of our service item. So this column here is what it's about. Now let's think about, say for a second that Johnny here has arrived at the site and he pushes a button somewhere in Sigmax Connect to indicate, I'm going to start working on that order. That triggers an update back to Business Central. So I'll simulate it by setting it manually. And because we have a planning now for this order, we're going to send an update back to Dime.Scheduler and update that little bar at the bottom. So it was this blue color, now you can see it's orange, was updated automatically. So the planner knows now by looking at the color that the order is in progress and he'll probably make it on time to get that item done. So finally here, we can see this in-process color is linked to this orangey hint. Now, of course, there's much more to talk about Dime.Scheduler. I've barely scratched the surface, but the gist is that we start our work in Business Central as you do usually, take a little detour to Dime.Scheduler to find the right resource for the job, and then once we plan it in, it goes back to Business Central, at which point we can have this bidirectional flow to and from Business Central. But now I think it's time to switch to Rick's demo and have a look at Sigmax Connect and how we can support the end-to-end workflows for the people on the road.
Well, thanks, Hendrik, for your introduction. I will now take it on further. Like Hendrik mentioned, Sigmax Connect is used to handle the administrative side of a work order out in the field. It's a field service app that works on laptops, tablets, and even smartphones. So it's super flexible for different situations and type of work. It's a one-in-all tool, meaning everything gets logged in one piece, and that's this piece which I got in my hand. Sigmax Connect is designed to really support the technician. It has clear screens, big buttons, and the workflow is forcing the technician throughout the work order to fill in whatever they need to fill in. Whether it's a service call or a routine maintenance, they always use the same app. And the cool thing is, you can tweak the features based on the type of job.
Can I stop you right there, Rick? You say it's a one-and-all tool, but you also say you can tweak the application. That sounds contradictory.
Yeah, well, it's a standard tool, so it's standard software, so you don't have to make changes to the software if you want other functionality. It's configured into workflows, and we got about 20 modules, and the modules consist of taking pictures, checklist, even a supply chain is integrated, and from that we can configure the application to customer needs. So that's how we roll.
Yeah. And what if the customer wants additional features? There's more processes to automate. There's new change in law. What happens when a customer goes live then?
Well, Sigmax Connect consists of more than 20 modules, and we can enable or disable a functionality. And we can integrate it in workflows, such as pictures, questionnaires, or even asset management. And when we enable it and add it to the workflow of the technician sees it immediately in his application, and he doesn't have to update the software or something like that. So it's like directly functionality available for the technician.
Okay.
One thing I want to do is to highlight the offline functionality. We all know that a connection is an issue in the field, and some areas doesn't have any true connection, and maybe in greater buildings with steel constructions there's also a connectivity issue. So we prepared Sigmax Connect for that. And we have an offline modus which supports the technician in the field so that he can continue his work even though the connectivity is lost. And he has all the information in this application. So we have a small database on it where we store master data like articles, but also assets and so further. And we got the work orders as shown in the screen, which he can proceed and do the administrative actions to that. When we look at the screen and we see the visits, you can see in the bottom of the screen a signature or a pop-up that the connectivity is lost and that all information is stored locally and that we can move on with our work. Let's move on to the next thing. And the next thing is the menu. And when we look at Sigmax Connect, we got a small hamburger in the left top of the screen, which we can click on, or we can just move our finger from left to right to show the menu in the screen. And what we see over there are some buttons and some functionality that the technician can use. But also these buttons are configurable. So in this demo, we see all the functionality that is available. But in the end, when the customer doesn't need any functionality like the packing list or the timesheet or the article catalog, we can switch that off. But if we look any further from now, we see functionality that is very important to our technician. So when he starts his day, he got some work orders planned, and he might need some articles to take away in his van. And what we got for that is the packing list. And when we click on the packing list, we see the scheduled work order shown in the screen, like Hendrik planned it. And there we see one piece of switch on and off, which should be available to the technician for using later on the work order ending on 154. So from the packing list, he can go to the warehouse, he can pick the items, and he can put them in the van. When we look further at the menu, we also see the article catalog. We can see something about shipments. We can see something about counts. We can see the refrigerant module, the information, and we can also see the language. And we support currently a lot of languages in the application, and that's very handy for our international customers and partners.
Yeah, Rick, about that, is it one global language, or can every technician choose its own language?
Well, the technician can choose his own language, and even more, he can also switch the language within the workflow. So, for example, if you live in Belgium and the technician is Dutch, he can switch the language to French if the customer is French. So he can switch it within the workflow to show the right summary to the customer in his own language. So that's super cool.
That's very nice.
So let's move further with the task overview. And the task overview we see in the screen matches the planning of Dime.Scheduler. So Hendrik scheduled some tasks for today, and we see these tasks in this task overview. But we also see some data from Business Central. At first, we see the work order, we see the customer in the header, which is bold, and then we see the address with the town and the type of work. In this case, it's a service order, and we see the agenda and the time where it needs to be executed. That's from 11:30 till 3:30 in the afternoon. And when we click on the work order, we see all the details which come from Business Central. So when you look at Dime.Scheduler or you look at our Connect back office, we haven't added any information to the work order. We only plug into Business Central, we get all the information our sides, and then we show it over here. The overview which we see here is called a summary template, and we can configure the information which is shown over here. So we can determine what information to show or what information the technician doesn't need to see for this work order. So let's look at the details. At first we see some address information, customer address. We also see some contact information, and you see some hyperlinks in the screen. So the hyperlinks are clickable. We can send some emails, but we also can click on telephone numbers or maybe attachments which are available to see some technical information, or maybe to call the customer that we're on our way and that we're expecting to be like 30 minutes away from the customer, and we're getting there really quickly. After that, we see the side items. So we have a service order, but we also have a couple of side items which we added to the service order, and we can see them in the screen. At first, we see a Bosch trend line. That's a heater with some asset information. And what we also see over there, and I mentioned that in the packing list, is that we need one piece of switch. That switch is very important because we need it to fix the issue on the heater. The second side item is about a carrier single split air conditioning with its own properties. And the third one is a water softener. And the water softener also got his own properties, which we have to check during the work order. So when the technician has seen all the details and he has determined to pick the right things from the warehouse, he gets in his van and he like to move on to the customer, he has to press the button Transit. And when he pushes the button Transit, there will be a signal to all kind of systems, but also to Dime.Scheduler, to say, well, hey, I'm on my way to the customer, so the status information will be changed, and the colors will also be changed in Dime.Scheduler to make it visible to the planner. So when I push the button, in the background all the information is synced, not only to Dime, but also to Business Central, and we can move on in the workflow. And the second screen he sees is the Transit screen. It's about the same screen as the task details, but it's more about traveling, and the information is more into the status of the work order right now. So we only see information which is applicable to travel to the customer, so we don't need any side items, we don't need any information about planned articles. We only want to see the address, which is shown in the button of the screen, and we see some contact details of Mr. Kevin Green in the header of the screen. Right in the lower side of the screen, you see a button for navigation. And when I press the button, he automatically will start Google Maps, insert the address into the application, and show us the route to the customer to make sure that he's going to travel the right way. He don't get into any traffic jams, and within an hour and about 15 minutes, he will be at site at customer. I will close the navigation app and continue with working in Sigmax Connect. So the next question might be, am I at the right place? Is the customer at home? Can we start the service order? And if he can, he presses the button Start, and then he move on to the next screen where we see the activities. Also in this case, the status has been changed, so we will update automatically Dime.Scheduler, we will update Business Central, and send status back and forth. And from here, the technician can start with working on the side items. When we look at the side items, we see 3 side items. We call that activities, and we can work on that. We can choose our own sequence, so we can start with the water softener if we like, but we also can start with the Bosch trendline or the carrier single split, whatever the technicians like to do first. So in this case, I will start with the Bosch trendline, and I will take a look at the details from it. And what we see here is the details of that service item. So we see some side item properties, and we see some planned materials. And that are the same materials that we saw in the packing list in the menu of Sigmax Connect in the beginning of the demo. So when we choose to move on, we will start the side item, and we see what happens next. So I click on Start, and what we see there are the details of the assets. And the details of the assets are very important to the technician, but also to his colleagues. So when you go to the customer, maybe in a year or later on, you want to make sure that all the details are good and are up to date. So when we enter this screen, the application is checking on the properties and saying, hey, well, we need the barcode. The barcode is missing. You have to fill in. We also see a red exclamation mark, which is shown in the screen. So we can't even continue. If you look at the bottom of the screen to the next button, it's grayed out. We can't continue to the next step in the workflow without filling in its barcode. So the first thing we have to do is filling the barcode. And we can do that with the camera, or if we have some rugged devices and maybe integrated barcode scanner, we can also use the integrated barcode scanner to scan it. But for now, I will click on the barcode, I will click on Scan. It shows the barcode, it fills in, and I can push OK, and I can then move on to the next screen.
Yeah, quick question, Rick. Are there any other options than barcodes, like a QR code or something similar?
Good question, Hendrik. We use barcodes. We also use manual input, as you saw before. But we also can use NFC. Which we also use for mobile payments and that kind of functionality. But we can use NFCs when barcodes are not applicable or not usable in a specific environment. So yeah, we got other options like NFC and manual input.
Okay.
So now the technician has checked the assets and moved to the next screen. He sees a task menu. And this task menu has functionality which he can use to fill in the right information for this work order. And as we take a further look into the screen, we see 4 options, and we see 1 option with a red exclamation mark. And what we know from red exclamation marks is that the information is mandatory. So he has to first fill in this checklist before he can continue in the workflow, which we also can see in the bottom of the screen, where the button is grayed out, so he can't move any further from now. So when we take a deeper look in the screen, we see 4 options. And the 4 options are an overview. And when we press the overview, we go back to the object details and we see the property of the assets. And what we see over here is some information about location which isn't filled, but I think might not be mandatory. But we also see the barcode which I've scanned previously in the previous screen. So it's filled in, and we can check it over here, and we can see that the information is okay. The second functionality is the checklist. And the checklist consists of various questions and questions groups. And it's all about maintaining the header in this case. And what we did is we configured a checklist where some of the questions are mandatory, some of the questions aren't mandatory, some of the questions are conditional to other questions and answers, and some of the questions has pre-filled answers to make it, the technician, even more easier. So when we look at the checklist, we see 4 groups, like a visual check, a functional check, we can see measurements, and we can see a final check and recommendation with some exclamation marks. And I will get to the first question. So there's a question about, is the heater free from dirt and dust? Well, it is. And are there any signs of leakages? Well, no, that's default. But if I change the answer to yes, we can see a new question which pops up, and that's a picture. So if there are any leakages or something else wrong on this heater, this question is enabled and is also mandatory. So we have to make a picture to move further in the workflow. So, Hendrik, can I make a picture of you, maybe?
Or maybe you have something better. I have this water bottle of Sigmax.
Oh, I also. All right, so then we make a picture of the water bottle. And after that, we click on OK. And the water bottle and the image is shown in the screen. And what we can do, and you can see it in the top of the screen, we see a tray bin, but we also see some properties. And that means that we can make a sketch on this picture. This sketch can be made in a couple of colors, like yellow, black, white, red, or even green, I guess. Yeah, green. And we have a size which we can change. So let's pick a green one and medium, and we can make a little drawing over this to make something more clear. And if we change the color to red, and we make another picture or another sketch, then we can see that information also on the picture. So I've made a quite nice picture, which we can use further on, and we can send also to other systems like Business Central. Put it to the work order, to the checklist. We get back to the checklist, and we see in the third question that the picture question is answered, and that there is an attachment available. If we go further in the checklist, we see a functional check. Is the thermostat okay? Yes or no? That's a toggle. And in the measurement side, we see some, how you call that? Some integer and some decimal questions and answers. So there's a question about the water pressure, and what we see over here is that there is a lower boundary and an upper boundary with 2 digits maximum. And if I want to fill in an answer that is above the upper boundary, we cannot proceed, or we cannot, it's not a valid value. So I have to pick a value which is 2.5. There's a question about the burner temperature, and the burner temperature, we got a different way of registering that. So what we see over there is the minimum is 0 and the maximum is 300. So we got other boundaries than the previous question. So I fill in 200 over here, and then we take a look at the efficiency. And the efficiency is in percentage, and it's about between 0 and 100. So I fill in 65. Is the exhaust system okay? Yes, it is, or maybe it might not. And what we can see over here is that there is no conditional question based on the answer to exhaust system. In the next group, we find something about, did we restart the heater, yes or no? Did we find any technical issues? And what we also see over here is that there is also, again, a new question we have to answer. And in this case, if there are some technical issues applicable, we can choose from a list to select the right technical issue, which is the case over here. And this list is multiple select, so I can choose a couple of reasons. I can press the button select all or the button deselect all, and the answers I will choose will be filled in the screen so we can check if we did it the right way. The last question is the customer advice. What advice do you want to give to your customer? Well, maybe none. Or maybe he needs to replace the expansion vessel within 3 months, possible. Or maybe he has to keep the room clean, or something else. And in this case, I choose for none. I will click OK. All questions are answered. Validation is OK. And we can move on to the task list.
Yeah, maybe just to confirm, none of what you've shown is static. Everything is dynamic, right? So that's something they can configure themselves with the questionnaire and what the menu has over here. Nothing of that is static, right?
Yeah, the questionnaire is not static. Later on in the flow, we see another questionnaire which we have configured. So whatever you can make up, you can put it in a questionnaire and you can let the technician fill it in for you, even with conditional questions or not. Mandatory questions, multiple select, data, time. I didn't show that one. But yeah, everything is possible.
That's very nice. Very powerful as well.
All right, so we checked the overview. We checked if the assets are changed in the right way. We went to the checklist and we filled in the mandatory questions over there. It's now time to go to the used articles. And one thing which gets my attention is that even though we haven't been in the used articles in this menu, there's a sign about number registered 1. And that means that there is a registration of a possible article in this module. And when I click on it, I see that there's one article. It's called Switch On Off. And that's the article that we entered in Business Central. So we entered an article to the side item in Business Central, and it's sent to Sigmax Connect to show to the technician that this article is planned and that he should possibly use it for this work order. Okay, so when a technician is working on the service order, he often uses materials to solve a problem or to maintain an asset. It's also very important for proper invoicing or for supply chain that he adds the right articles to his service order. And when he wants to do that, he clicks on the plus button and he then can search through the article database for, like example, the reservoir. So when I look for the reservoir, it's shown in the screen, and it's shown also a couple of more details. So we see the description, reservoir, we see some item codes, and we also see the unit over there. And when I click it and I select it, I can add the quantity. And in this case, we can add a quantity from 1 till 100, but that's also configurable in the software. In this case, I use 1. I click on OK, and then I go back to the previous screen, the task list, where we can see that we have 2 articles, 2 different type of articles registered in the screen. You might think that searching articles may take a long time. Well, maybe that's true in some other cases, but we have optimized the searching of articles. So if you put in a description or you put in an item code or maybe you put in some other search values, the application rapidly search through the article database and find the right articles in the list where you can add them. The last functionality in the task list is the attachment. And well, you might think, well, Rick, hey, you just added some attachment to the checklist. So why do we have the opportunity right here in the task menu? Well, the other attachments are related to the questionnaire and to the answers over there. And these attachments are related to the service item itself. And we can even add other attachments. So in the questionnaire, we added a picture. But in this attachment configuration, we can also import other file types, such as Word documents, Excel documents, PDFs, and so further on. But we can also still make a picture or even a sketch. So I will skip that one, and I will move on to the next screen. The next screen is about the time we spend on a job. And the time spent on a job can be specified in this screen. And this screen will show us the starting time of the service order, and it also shows us the current time and the amount of time we have to register in this screen. So when we take a look at the bottom of the screen, it says, well, you have to specify 20 minutes, and the minimum is about 5. So we can specify our work from 5 till about 20 minutes. It's also configurable, but for this demo, we configure it in this way. When we push the plus button, we can add contract work for work which included in the contract, out of contract work which is not included in the contract and should be billable afterwards. And we can choose for travel time, and travel time is not applicable in this case. So I choose for contract work. The duration is automatically filled in on 20 minutes. We get back to the previous screen, and what we see over here is that everything is okay and we can proceed to the next step. Well, we're at the end of the workflow for the service item. There's still one question. Is the service item ready or not? And the technician has to fill in the situation for now. So he can say, well, it's ready, or maybe it's not ready. And what we see is that the application depends on the status information. And if you choose ready, there won't be any question left. But if we choose to put in service item not ready, there's a question about the detail. Maybe we should order some material. Maybe we can plan a new visit. So we got two more options to specify if the service item is not ready. For now, we choose to put in that the service item is ready. We continue to the next screen, and we get back to the activity list. Maybe you saw a smart bar in the bottom of the screen about synchronization. But when we finish a side item, the synchronization is automatically turned on, immediately syncing back all the information back to Dime.Scheduler and also to Business Central. So what we see is a green exclamation mark at the Bosch trend line. So the side item is successfully executed. Okay, now that we have finished one of the activities, we can choose to close the service order and move on to the next service order to another customer for today. What we see over here is that we got 2 activities or service items left. But for now, we leave it that way, and we want to move on to finish the work order. And for that, I click on the button in the screen, Finish, and here are the statuses shown which can be applicable to the service order. So the service order can be ready, can be aborted, or can be interrupted. These are other statuses than we have seen at the side items. And for now, I choose to click on Service Order Ready. We can even fill in a remark if we like, but for now on, everything is okay. So from the status screen, we move on to the next screen, and that's the customer approval. And in the customer approval, the customer can approve the job which the technician has performed earlier on. And we also see some result codes over here, which are, again, different from the side items and the service order. So the customer can approve, or maybe the customer does not approve. But in this case, he approves, and he can fill in his signature by writing over the screen, and what we see is some watermarks in the bottom of the screen with something about general terms, a task number, and date timestamp, which we can send back to Business Central and use later on for probably invoicing or maybe some historical data. So the signature has been set. I'll click Next, and I will just get one more questionnaire. Maybe it looks familiar. It's the same way we configure questionnaires for, like example, the heater. But in this way, we had some other questions, and we want to make the technician a kind of a salesman. He's right there at the customer side, he sees things, and maybe he thinks, well, there should be possibilities to sell something like isolation, specific glass, or maybe some heating pumps for more efficiency towards energy consumption. So when we take a look at this question, we got one question group, and we got some questions about if the customer wants to receive his report digital. If he wants so, there are a couple more of questions. If he doesn't want that, we still have 2 more questions left. Has the customer additional questions? Well, yeah. Well, it's all about maybe some replacements. Maybe he needs some more screens inside. Maybe he needs some more screens outside. All these options can be added, can be changed to the right subject. But for now, I will click on he wants more screens inside and outside. Then we have a question about the way of communication. Customer can contact us, and the customer wants to be called. You can also see the game we play with a question and answer, and maybe a mandatory question afterwards. In this case, the customer contacts us. We don't have any additional remarks. We click next. It's a confirmation screen. It's the last screen of the workflow. The technician has ended his job. He can continue to the next service order, and that's it. So the screen is automatically shut. We can continue to the visit screen. There are no more service orders planned yet, and we can move on.
Well, I hope by now you get a pretty good idea how field service management works in Business Central with 2 of our extensions. And that just leaves me to one more thing to cover, and that is what to do in case you're interested in learning more about one of our products. And then I have to bring up this slide right here, where you can see what you can do next. Even though we're 2 separate companies, but we work closely together, we have still 2 separate web pages and 2 different sets of contacts. For Dime.Scheduler, it's quite simple. Just go to our website, book a demo, and then if there's a fit, we might put you on a free trial to evaluate whether Dime.Scheduler is the right tool for you. Rick, how can people get in touch with you?
People can get in touch with us via the online channels like LinkedIn, YouTube, or our website, sigmax.nl.
All right, and that's all we have for today. I think both Rick and I can keep on going for a very long time to talk about our software, but this is a good place to end. On behalf of both Sigmax Field Service Solutions and Dime Software, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.
Goodbye.